for your colheitas and your tawnies. I know you make vintage and single kinta vintage, but why is it that you're concentrating on the colheitas rather than vintage?
Well, this is a tradition of our company. We have always produced vintage ports as well, but our market for vintage ports was at that time a very small market. Vintage ports were mainly sold by the British port companies in Britain at that time. So the non-British port companies, in general, they produced their vintage ports, but in small quantities. But the great wines, which came into our cellars, they were aged a small quantity in the bottle as vintage ports, and all the rest remained in the casks. And with time, they turned into tawny ports, into colheita ports. So many of our colheita ports were at the origin exactly the same ports, which did also give origin to vintage ports. But after all these years and being aged on another way in wood, not in the bottle, they got completely different. And if we compare them, we can see a clear difference between the same wine aged in bottle as vintage port and aged in cask as colheita port. We have always declared a much larger quantity of colheita port, and I suppose this is the reason why we are much more famous for colheita ports than for vintage ports.
And how far back do you have casks nowadays? How many years back?
The oldest colheita port we have on sale nowadays dates back to 1900. But in our cellars we have three colheita ports from the 19th century. We have one from 1863. I suppose that this was a port which has been bought by the founders to start their activity. That's my feeling. And we have two colheita ports from 1896. One is red, the other is white. The colheita port from 1863 is particularly interesting under an historical point of view because it is a pre-phylloxera wine still in cask.